Welcome back to 15.2 for you. This is probably another day or maybe a couple minutes for me. This is literally less than a minute from the last video. So let's go ahead and get started with 25.2. I think I might have said 15. 25.2, body plans and adaptations. So we're looking at animals, right? We considered that they all kind of start as one cell, become a blastula, which is that little fluid-filled ball of cells. Then eventually develops a gastrula, which is a little opening that is either going to be the anus or the mouth of the object of the organism. And then from there, it develops a mesoderm that forms different parts of the internal structure of the body. Well, now let's look at a little more categorization of the body plans of organisms and the adaptations that certain groups of organisms have. First up is this word symmetry. That describes, in biology, that describes the arrangement of body structures. In general, it just means something can be cut in half and both sides are the same. There's different types of symmetry because you can't always cut the same thing in half in different directions and get the same piece of the object, and we're going to go over those different types of symmetry. So the first up is asymmetry. Asymmetry means it's actually not symmetric, so everything I just said doesn't count. They are irregularly shaped. They do not have any symmetry. They do not have any, like, one side or the other kind of looks the same. If you look at this sponge, you can't really cut this whole thing in half in any way, shape, or form and get two identical looking pieces. All right? If you cut this thing in half, you're not going to get two identical looking pieces. It's just clumps of stuff. There's no reason to it. All right? One thing interesting about these sponges that specifically we're looking at right here, they only actually consist of 2 layers of cells, and these are unique because they don't include the endoderm and the mesoderm, or the gastrula stage. So that stuff we learned last section, it does not apply to sponges specifically these sponges. They are the only guys who don't have an endoderm and a mesoderm. They're just 2 layers of cells, incredibly simple body plan. So the argument is they actually are probably one of the first types of organisms, and they haven't changed much since back then because it seems to be working out just fine for them, at least for the last 650 million years, according to this theory. But sponges are asymmetric. You can't cut them in half anyway and get the same looking object. Now let's look at something called radial symmetry. Radial symmetry, let's read the definition, can be divided along any plane through a central axis into roughly equal halves. Okay, so if we look at this jellyfish and we cut it this way, like that, then the shaded part and the unshaded part are pretty much even. Yes, I know there's a little bit more extra tentacles, but we could move this tentacle guy over there and then it'd be a lot more even. This thing is just taken underwater. So this is radial symmetry. You can cut it like that and it's half on both sides and it looks the same. We can also cut it like that and the top and bottom looks the same, or if you can imagine doing it at an angle, then the top left and the bottom right would look the same. That's radial symmetry. This thing right here, it shows you we can cut this object here, here, or here, and the opposite side of it is always going to look the same. It's radially symmetric. Anything that's kind of like a circle like that, or like a repeating pattern, is probably going to be radially symmetric. Jellyfish are radially symmetric. Hydra are radially symmetric. I think that's all the examples I can think of and all the examples that the book gives. A lot of animals, though, have bilateral symmetry, meaning you can cut them in half one way and have both sides look the same. We can see that if you cut this butterfly down the middle right here, both sides look the same. Any other way you cut that butterfly, it's not going to look the same, but cut it like that and it's going to look the same. Cut this cat in half, like it can't draw 3D shapes, but like from its nose and follow this thing, then both halves of that animal will look the same. Taking out like minor defects and stuff, if you cut me down that middle like that, it's going to be the same on both sides. Yes, your heart's technically over there and stuff, but for the most part, your body plan is separated separated bilaterally. In a bilateral organism, the anterior is called the head end, and it often has the sensory organs like your ears, mouth, nose, things like that, your eyes. The posterior of these animals is the tail end. You guys have obviously, I'm sure you've heard of your butt being called your posterior. The dorsal is the upper surface and ventral is the lower surface for things like us that walk upright. The back is dorsal and our front is the ventral. Okay? So dorsal is your back or the upper surface, and ventral is your stomach or the lower surface. So with regards to bilateral symmetry, there's 3 different body plans that we can go through. What that means is up until this point, we're all the same. We have the mesoderm, endoderm, and ectoderm. We are bilaterally symmetric. So let's go ahead and see what these 3 possible types of body plans we have are. And the way I simplify this in my head is what kind of gummy worms are there? It comes down to these 3 types, and every animal can what the heck? Oh, every animal can be reduced to one of these 3 gummy worms. We'll see which one we are soon. First up, we got the acoelomates. All right, acoelomates. That's what these guys are. These develop from our 3 layers we're talking about, ectoderm, endoderm, and mesoderm, but they have no body cavities. Okay, they have no, like, quote-unquote empty space inside of their bodies. Flatworms are bilaterally symmetric. They have compact bodies, they have solid bodies, meaning there's no like empty space or room to wiggle around on the inside of this flatworm. If we cut it in half and look, this is just attached to this, is just attached to this, is just attached to this. Okay, so we have the digestive tract in the middle. We have the endoderm, which is the internal tissue, the mesoderm, the middle tissue, and then we have ectoderm is the outer tissue, and it's all just layered right on top of each other. That is a coelomate, and as we've been talking about, the flatworms are pretty simple. These are the guys that only have the one tube in and out of their body. So those are acoelomates. We see here a flattened body and branched digestive tract allow for the diffusion of nutrients, water, and oxygen to supply all body cells and to eliminate waste. So just like we were talking about last section, if this thing eats something here, the only way that this part of the body is going to get that nutrients is for it to just simply, by diffusion and like trade cell by cell, get over there like this, directly through. No specialized organ systems or anything like that. It's just cell to cell to cell passing the nutrients. Those are acoelomates. Next up, we have the pseudocoelomates. You'll notice, unlike a flatworm, the body of a roundworm, or pseudocoelomate, has a space that develops between the endoderm and the mesoderm. So the endoderm and mesoderm are not in like direct contact. Okay? It's called a pseudocoelom, and that is a fluid-filled body cavity partly lined with mesoderm. So if we look here, we have a pseudocoelom. It's a body cavity. It's fluid-filled, like extra space almost. Pseudocoelomates can move quickly because since these are like fluid-filled little sacs, they can kind of attach muscles to these different fluid-filled sacs and almost use them as like a skeleton. It's not a skeleton because it's obviously not made of bone or anything like that, but it's just like firm fluid-filled sacs that the muscles can attach to and move around with. They have a one-way digestive tract that has regions with specific functions. The mouth takes in food, and the breakdown and absorption of food occurs in the middle section, and then the anus expels the waste. So pseudocoelomates eat through here and poop through there, whereas the acoelomates just have one tube right there to eat and poop out of. They have a pseudocoelom, which means they have a fluid-filled cavity, and they kind of attach muscles to it and use it to move around in. And the coelom, where does it say that? Oh, right here. Fluid-filled body cavity is called a pseudocoelom. That's why they're called pseudocoelomates, because they have a pseudocoelom. Now let's look at this last guy, the coelomate. In this case, a segmented worm like an earthworm. The body cavity of an earthworm develops from a coelom, which is a fluid-filled space that is completely surrounded by mesoderm. Humans have a coelomate body plan. We have fluid-filled spaces completely surrounded by mesoderm inside of our body. This is also the greatest diversity of species in the coelomates when compared to the acoelomates and the pseudocoelomates. Humans, insects, and fishes are all coelomates. We all have these fluid-filled cavities inside of us. We have specialized organs and organ systems that do special things. We have organs that are suspended within the fluid-filled cavities. And like the pseudocoelom, the coelom, this fluid-filled stuff that we have inside of us, cushions and protects our internal organs. It also allows our organs to kind of move around a little bit. That might be a little weird, but if you think about it, if you were to take a deep breath right now, your lungs kind of got larger and then got smaller. There was room for them to do that because there's a little bit of like space in there, a little bit of wiggle room. Also in doing that, you kind of pushed your other organisms aside, You also pushed your other organs around just a little bit. Females will eventually, some females become pregnant. When they are pregnant, their organs have to move around in order to make space for the baby. They could not move around if they did not have these fluid-filled body cavities. If we were like this, that means trying to fit a baby inside of this jelly material would essentially just stretch the jelly material and kind of rip it. But instead over here, our organs can move around. So if a baby is trying to form, the stomach can just kind of get pushed aside, the intestines can kind of get pushed aside, everything can kind of get squished to make space for this. Also interesting, I found in getting ready for this chapter, if you have a kidney transplant, a lot of times they won't take out your kidney, they'll just attach your new one into some of the empty space that you have already. So there's already a little bit of room to like, you need a new kidney? Well, you're not going to take out the old one, we're just going to put a new one next to it. So you'll actually have 3 kidneys. It's kind of crazy. But those are coelomates. Now, this paragraph explains that over time, lots of different organisms have lots of different ways that their outer covering became different, or their inner coverings got specialized or something like that. We're not going to go into this, again, super specific details. Let's just go over some general characteristics. Some animals have an exoskeleton. You guys know that that's like the skeleton on the outside of the body, and all the soft tissues are on the inside. It can protect from water loss, protect from predators. The muscles attached on the inside. One problem with that is you can't really grow that. You just have to make a new one, which is why organisms molt that have that. We have invertebrate organisms, organisms that don't have backbones. Crabs, spiders, grasshoppers, dragonflies, beetles. Those are all invertebrates, and they have exoskeletons. So we see here, exoskeletons are usually found in invertebrates. Then we have things like us, with endoskeletons. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm skipping ahead. Let's keep with these invertebrates, things without backbones. You can not have a backbone and have an internal skeleton. And it gives examples like sea urchins and sea stars. Okay? But you can also be a vertebrate like you and I and have an endoskeleton like you or myself. That means our skeleton is on the inside, our muscles attached to it on the inside still, but like not on the inside of the bones, on the outside of the bones, but that's on the inside of our meaty part. The endoskeleton doesn't necessarily have to be bone though. You see here, it can technically be, where does it go? Where'd it go? Calcium carbonate or cartilage. Okay? But if the skeleton's on the inside, it's an endoskeleton. If it's on the outside, it's an exoskeleton. If you have a backbone, you are a vertebrate. If you do not have a backbone, you are an invertebrate. This paragraph just talks about some of the stuff that we already went over. So I'm not going to repeat that again. I just want to show you guys some more examples. These two things would be invertebrates. They do not have a backbone. These would be vertebrates. They do have a backbone. In my opinion, a lot of the interesting organisms are the invertebrates. And octopi are always more interesting than birds to me. Like, look at this thing. That thing is just so creepy. So cool. All the cool organisms are invertebrates, and the boring ones are the vertebrates. So monkeys, birds, humans, dogs, those are all vertebrates. Insects, mollusks, sponges, octopus, all that stuff are invertebrates. So those are just the kind of general characteristics of animals and the body plans of the different animals. That's about it for section 15.